her voice cut through the studio like a blade. Kellyanne Conway was shouting, not speaking. Every syllable was sharpened into an attack, her finger jabbing in the air as if it could pierce through the camera lens and land in the living rooms of millions of Americans. The host tried to interrupt, his hands half raised in a plea for order, but Kellyanne's voice surged over him, relentless, defiant, dripping with scorn, and then dashed stillness across the table. Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She did not roll her eyes, nor raise her voice to match the storm raging in front of her. Instead, she sat in absolute composure, her expression the kind of calm that could unnerve even the loudest opponent. She waited, her silence louder than Kellyanne's screaming. Her eyes did not blink away. They locked, steady, unshaken. Contrast was cinematic. One figure vibrating with rage, the other anchored in unmovable calm. On live television, in a nation addicted to noise, that silence was deafening. America held its breath. The narrator's voice seemed to echo. This was no ordinary political spat. This was dignity under attack. Kellyanne's words grew harsher, more personal. She didn't just question Jasmine's ideas. She went after her identity, her presence, her right to even sit at that table. It was a calculated storm, meant to rattle, to provoke, to break composure. But Jasmine did not move. The studio lights reflected off her still face, a portrait of strength under fire. Viewers at home leaned forward, almost shouting at their screens. Say something. Fight back. Don't let this stand. And yet Jasmine remained patient, letting Kellyanne burn herself out in the chaos of her own fury. The longer the silence stretched, the more Kellyanne's rage seemed to collapse in on itself, exposing not strength but desperation. The host's eyes darted nervously between them, sensing the tension that was now a living, breathing thing inside. The studio, clash of worlds, anger versus dignity, chaos versus calm, was unfolding before millions. And then, Jasmine leaned forward ever so slightly. Her lips parted, her voice low and deliberate, prepared to answer. The shouting stopped. The room stilled. No one expected what Jasmine said next. It was supposed to be a routine segment, another primetime clash of opinions on one of America's most watched political talk shows. The panel was stacked with recognizable faces, pundits, strategists, lawmakers each, invited to dissect the question of the night. What does leadership look like in an America more divided than ever? Right! The cameras rolled, the lights blazed, and millions tuned in expecting fiery words, but nothing out of the ordinary. Then Kellyanne Conway turned the debate into something else entirely. From the moment she opened her mouth, it wasn't about policies or principles. It was about dominance. She cut across her fellow panelists, hijacking every question with a torrent of words designed not to enlighten but to overwhelm. And when the spotlight shifted toward Jasmine Crockett, Kellyanne's energy sharpened. This wasn't political commentary anymore. It was personal theater. This wasn't just politics. The narrator's voice echoed. It was about truth versus chaos, respect versus rage. As Kellyanne raised her voice higher, her interruptions became relentless. The anchors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, shuffling papers, glancing to producers off camera. Had seen heated exchanges before, but this was different. This was one guest trying to bulldoze the entire stage, drowning it in noise. The show's set designed to project balance and order suddenly felt like a battleground, and America was watching. The audience at home began to sense it. Tweets flew across the timeline. Why is she screaming like that? Does she even want a debate or just a shouting match? Clips were already being clipped, shared, and replayed within minutes. The anchors attempted to intervene, reminding the panel of the topic, urging a return to civility. But civility was the last thing. On Kellyanne's mind, every interruption. Every finger jab carried the same message. Drown out the other voice. Deny her space to breathe. The target wasn't random. It was Jasmine Young, black, unapologetically progressive. To Kellyanne, silencing Jasmine wasn't just a tactic. It was the show. Yet Jasmine's restraint only raised the stakes further. She refused to join the shouting, refused to mirror the rage. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. And in that silence, Millions of viewers recognized something powerful: composure as a weapon, patience as defiance. The contrast grew unbearable. One side red-faced, flailing, losing control. The other side motionless, waiting for the right moment. It was David and Goliath, but with cameras capturing every second in real time, the anchors could feel it too. Their voices wavered as they tried to restore balance, asking Jasmine for her response. Kellyanne cut across them again, louder than before, determined not to let Jasmine's words ever reach the air. The studio audience murmured, unsettled by the sheer spectacle, and yet the tension only made Jasmine's silence more piercing. Every viewer was waiting now, not for Kellyanne's next outburst, but for Jasmine's reply. What would it sound like? Would it be fiery? Would she match rage with rage? Or would she take another route altogether? The stakes had transformed. This was no longer a panel debate about abstract politics. It was a test of America's character, live on national television. Would rage define the night or dignity? Would noise win or truth? Viewers leaned in, sensing that something bigger than a TV segment was happening. And then, just as Kellyanne's fury reached its peak, Jasmine finally lifted her head, her lips parting to speak. But the stakes would rise even higher when Jasmine finally spoke. To understand the firestorm that erupted in that studio, you have to understand the woman who ignited it. Kellyanne Conway has never been a stranger to conflict. For decades, she built a career not on calm persuasion, but on the art of bending reality itself. To her supporters, she was a master tactician, a strategist who knew how to seize headlines and dominate the conversation. To her critics, she was something else entirely, a spin doctor whose weapon was chaos and whose product was confusion. Long before she became a household name, Kellyanne learned the power of framing. She wasn't just answering questions, she was reshaping them. Every interview, every debate was a battlefield where facts were pliable, and winning meant leaving the opponent stumbling. When cornered with uncomfortable truths, she didn't retreat. She redefined the very language. That infamous phrase, alternative facts, wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was her philosophy, condensed into 2 words. Reality is what I say it is, and truth is just a tool to be bent. It worked. For years, Kellyanne thrived in the media ecosystem by turning outrage into oxygen. The louder the criticism, the brighter she shined. Pundits would accuse her of dodging, spinning, even lying, and yet she never blinked. She smiled, shrugged, and doubled down. Viewers couldn't look away. Love her or loathe her, she was impossible to ignore. But behind that skill lay a contradiction, too glaring to miss. She sold herself as a defender of the American people. Yet her sharpest talent was undermining the very trust that binds people together. She spoke of values, yet tore at the seams of civility. She championed truth, yet made truth optional, and chaos followed her everywhere. In interviews, she thrived on rattling her hosts, talking over questions until they collapsed under the weight of noise. On panels, she wielded interruption like a weapon, forcing her opponents onto the defensive before they could finish a sentence. It wasn't debate, it was disruption, perfected into an art form. The strategy had served her well in the past. Networks booked her because they knew she would bring drama. Outrage guaranteed ratings. Clips of her interviews went viral, sparking arguments that lasted for days. In that sense, Kellyanne never lost. Even when the substance of her claims crumbled under scrutiny, the performance itself carried the day. But there was another side to that coin. For all her mastery of chaos, there was always a limit, a line that even she could not control. Because while noise may dominate in the moment, silence has a power of its own. And when Kellyanne faced someone unwilling to wrestle in the mud, someone who refused to play her game, her greatest weapon could suddenly become her greatest weakness. What made this clash so different? Kellyanne entered the studio that night expecting a familiar script. She would shout, interrupt, overwhelm, and the cameras would eat it up. She had done it 100 times before. She believed Jasmine Crockett would crack, would stumble into the trap of shouting back, turning the debate into a spectacle of mutual chaos. That was the stage Kellyanne knew best where. Volume replaced vision and fury replaced fact. But Jasmine wasn't playing the same game. As Kellyanne screamed, Jasmine stayed still. As Kellyanne raised her voice, Jasmine lowered hers. Every second of Jasmine's silence worked like a mirror, reflecting Kellyanne's fury back at her, stripping it of its effectiveness. The very chaos Kellyanne relied upon began to look less like strength and more like desperation. The contradictions of her career, her insistence on controlling the narrative, her dependence on noise, her manipulation of truth suddenly turned against her. In the stark comparison, she wasn't the strategist. She was the storm spinning out of control, and millions of viewers at home saw it. They weren't applauding her sharpness anymore. They were asking themselves a different question. Why is she so afraid of letting Jasmine speak? Kellyanne had built her legacy on twisting debates until no one remembered the question. But tonight was different. The more she raged, the more obvious. It became that she wasn't silencing Jasmine. She was exposing herself. Her strategy of chaos was beginning to collapse. And in the silence that followed, Jasmine Crockett was preparing to deliver the answer that Kellyanne never saw coming. But tonight, that strategy would backfire in ways she'd never imagined. To understand why, Jasmine Crockett's silence rattled Kellyanne Conway so deeply, you have to step back from the studio lights and return to where her story began. Jasmine wasn't born into privilege, nor did she glide into politics on the coattails of others. Her path was carved from grit, persistence, a relentless refusal to be dismissed. She grew up in a world that rarely handed opportunities to women who looked like her. From a young age, she saw the sharp edge of inequality not as a statistic, but as a lived reality. The working-class neighborhood she called home taught her lessons that no textbook could, that justice wasn't evenly distributed, that voices like hers were often ignored, and that dignity had to be defended. Sometimes daily, when she chose the law, it wasn't because it was glamorous. It was because it was necessary. Jasmine stepped into civil rights law with clear eyes and a determined spirit. Her clients weren't CEOs or corporate titans. They were people fighting to keep their homes, their jobs, their freedom. She stood beside the wrongfully accused, the overlooked, the underestimated, and every courtroom battle sharpened her. Every victory, however small, carried the weight of someone's future. Every defeat reminded her why the fight mattered. It was in those courtrooms that Jasmine built the composure America would one day witness. She learned to stay calm as prosecutors thundered, as judges interrupted, as the odds stacked higher against her. She trained herself to listen, to wait, to strike only when her words would land with precision. To the untrained eye, her stillness might look like restraint. But to those who understood her, it was discipline, the product of battles that had required her to master patience, to speak only when it counted most. Her calm wasn't weakness, the narrator's voice declared. It was armor forged from battles far tougher than this. That armor would serve her well as she transitioned into politics. She carried into public service the same principles that had guided her law career: dignity, truth, and an unshakable loyalty to the communities that raised her. Elected to represent the people of Texas, Jasmine quickly developed a reputation. She wasn't the loudest in the room. She wasn't the one chasing sound bites. But when she did speak, people listened because they knew she had something worth. Saying her rise wasn't easy. She faced doubters at every turn, those who claimed she was too young, too bold, too unwilling to play by the old rules. She was underestimated, dismissed, even ridiculed. But time and again, she let the work speak louder than the noise. Her persistence turned skeptics into believers. Her composure turned critics into unwilling admirers. And through it all, Jasmine never forgot the people she came from. She carried their stories into every speech, every vote, every appearance. She stood as proof that politics didn't have to belong only to the powerful. It could belong to the people, if someone was brave enough to carry their voices forward. That's what made her presence at that TV studio so important. She wasn't there for theatrics. She wasn't there to spar for the sake of ratings. She was there to represent dignity in a space too often consumed by chaos. And when Kellyanne Conway tried to strip her of that dignity, Jasmine did what she had always done. She stayed calm. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew the value of waiting for the right moment. America didn't yet know it, but that moment was coming. In Jasmine's stillness was a lifetime of lessons. She had faced louder opponents than Kellyanne, more intimidating settings than a studio, stage higher stakes than a televised debate. She had been doubted, tested, underestimated every time. She had proven her strength not by matching fury with fury, but by holding her ground with patience and precision. That's why her silence carried such weight. Viewers didn't see weakness in her composure. They saw a woman standing firm, unwilling to be dragged down into chaos. They saw someone who represented their own frustrations, someone who could endure the noise of politics without becoming noise herself. Kellyanne's voice grew hoarse as she screamed. Jasmine's composure only grew stronger. It was the clearest metaphor for the moment. One woman fueled by rage, the other by discipline. One desperate to dominate, the other prepared to endure. And when Jasmine finally chose to speak, her words would not come from a place of anger. It would come from a place of clarity, of history, of the countless battles she had fought before this one. Because for Jasmine Crockett, composure was never silence. It was strategy. It was strength. It was the very thing that would turn the tables, and that calm would soon become her greatest weapon. The temperature in the studio rose with every second. Kellyanne Conway's voice, already sharp, climbed higher, shattering any pretense of order. She wasn't debating anymore. She was dominating airtime through sheer volume at every attempt. By the host to pivot to another panelist was bulldozed by her interruptions. She leaned across the desk, her words slicing the air, dripping with disdain. People like you don't understand how this country works. She barked her finger, jabbing again, as though every point needed to be punctured into existence. You think you can just waltz in here with your sanctimony and your lectures? Please. The insults were no longer subtle. They were personal, barbed, designed to provoke. Kellyanne shifted from policy to identity, attacking not Jasmine's arguments but Jasmine herself, her background, her credibility, even her right to be in the conversation. She framed it as toughness, but the aggression was raw. It's uncontrolled, seething, and still. Jasmine sat unmoved. Her composure was not the blankness of someone caught off guard. It was deliberate, the kind of silence that stretches a moment until it becomes unbearable. She let Kellyanne's words hang in the air, refusing to validate them with a flinch or a hurried defense. The longer Jasmine stayed silent, the more Kellyanne filled the space with noise. It began to backfire. The contrast was stark, almost theatrical. One woman flailing with fury, the other unshaken, steady, waiting. The audience at home noticed it. Immediately. Why is Jasmine so calm? Why won't she respond? Social media buzzed in real time. She's letting Kellyanne scream herself out. Brilliant, the hosts, visibly uncomfortable, tried again to regain control. Ladies, please, let's keep this civil, one urged. But Kellyanne barreled over him, her voice practically trembling with the force of her interruptions. She wanted Jasmine rattled, cornered, forced into the shouting match where chaos reigned. Yet every second of Jasmine's composure made Kellyanne's rage look less like dominance and more like desperation. Viewers leaned forward, the narrator's voice intoned. Was Jasmine going to break? Kellyanne's attacks escalated. Further, she dredged up old talking points, twisted Jasmine's positions into caricatures, and lobbed them like grenades across the table. She laughed bitterly between lines, smirking as though daring Jasmine to lose her cool. See? Sneered. She can't even answer. She knows she doesn't have one. But Jasmine's silence was not surrender. It was a choice. Every heartbeat she withheld a response. The tension grew tighter. Every second she refused to match Kellyanne's fury, the imbalance became more obvious. What had once seemed like Kellyanne's strength, her ability to control the noise, was unraveling. Under the weight of Jasmine's calm, the studio itself seemed to pause, hanging between noise and silence. The audience could feel that something had to break. Either Jasmine would finally snap or She would deliver the moment everyone was waiting for. And then, just as Kellyanne reached her crescendo, her voice raw from the shouting, Jasmine inhaled. She leaned forward slightly, eyes locked, lips parting, as if to finally release the words. She had held back all this time. The shouting stopped. The silence deepened, and in that suspended moment, millions of viewers sensed that the balance of power was about to shift. Then with one breath, she changed everything. The storm broke with a whisper. After minutes of relentless shouting, finger jabbing, and personal insults, Jasmine Crockett finally leaned forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not wave her hands. She didn't even blink more than once. She simply drew in a breath, let the silence hang for one heartbeat longer than anyone thought possible, and began. "Are you finished?" The words were not loud, but they were seismic. Kellyanne froze. The anchors froze. The viewers at home froze. It wasn't the volume that mattered, it was the authority. Jasmine hadn't been dragged into the storm, she had built her own ground. And suddenly everyone else was standing on it. Kellyanne blinked, visibly startled, her mouth parting as if to resume. But Jasmine pressed on, her voice steady, her pace deliberate. "You've spent the last 5 minutes shouting. Not debating. Not reasoning, shouting. And you want to call that strength?" Jasmine tilted her head, her eyes sharp but calm. "Call it patriotism when you tear people down. Call it truth when you twist words until they don't mean anything anymore. But let's be honest, this isn't about the truth. It's about control. And control, Miss Conway, isn't the same as dignity." A hush swept the studio. The camera cut to Kellyanne, whose lips trembled, a retort bubbling but unspoken. For once, the words weren't rushing to her aid. Jasmine continued her cadence. Like a drumbeat, slow but undeniable. "You see, I didn't come here to scream. I didn't come here to play your game of who can yell the loudest. Because my people, my community taught me something louder than shouting. They taught me persistence. They taught me composure. They taught me that when someone is screaming in your face, you don't match their rage. You expose it." Her voice dipped on the last line, a deliberate pause, the kind of silence that made everyone lean closer. Kellyanne shifted in her chair, her jaw tight, but Jasmine wasn't done. "You want America to believe that chaos is power. That rage is leadership. But look around." Jasmine gestured lightly toward the cameras, toward the audience beyond the screen. "People are tired, tired of division, tired of manipulation, tired of watching dignity get trampled by whoever can shout the longest." Kellyanne exhaled sharply, muttering, "Oh, please," but the interruption fell flat. Jasmine's calm sliced through it like glass. "This country doesn't need more rage. It needs responsibility. It needs leaders who don't hide behind insults, leaders who don't treat facts like toys, leaders who understand that shouting is easy, but building a future takes courage. Real courage." The anchors were silent. The studio was silent. Millions of viewers, scattered across living rooms and phone screens, felt the shift. It was the unmistakable moment when the shouting match ended and the truth took the floor, and then came the dagger. "Tonight," said, her tone soft but immovable, "you've shown America the difference. You've shown them what rage looks like. And I will show them what dignity looks like." Kellyanne's face twitched. For years, she had been the master of spin, the unflappable defender, the queen of alternative facts. But in this moment, as the cameras captured every flicker of expression, she looked shaken. It wasn't Jasmine's volume that disarmed her, it was Jasmine's refusal to play by the rules of chaos. The internet erupted. Within seconds, clips of Jasmine's calm counterattack were ripped, edited, and uploaded. Twitter lit up with side-by-side comparisons. Kellyanne screaming, Jasmine waiting. Instagram flooded with quotes overlaid on Jasmine's poised face. "This isn't about rage. It's about dignity." TikTok looped her opening line, "Are you finished?" As though it were the punchline of a decade-long joke finally landing. The anchors, realizing they were witnessing a viral moment in real time, glanced at each other but said nothing. They didn't need to. The story was writing itself. Kellyanne attempted to fire back. She tried to regain her footing, mocking Jasmine's sermon, scoffing about virtue signaling. but her words sounded hollow, brittle. The contrast was too stark. No matter what she said, the audience's eyes and ears remained fixed on Jasmine, because Jasmine wasn't just speaking to Kellyanne anymore. She was speaking to America. "You don't get to define me with your rage," Jasmine said, her tone unwavering. "You don't get to drown me out because you're louder. You don't get to scare this country into silence with anger. Not tonight." The line landed with the finality of a gavel. Even Kellyanne's silence seemed to confirm it. The narrators. The voice cut in. It was the mic drop moment no one expected. Rage had met restraint, chaos had met clarity, and dignity had won the round. The studio audience, normally constrained in its reactions, broke into scattered applause before the anchors hurriedly tried to move on. But it was too late. The story was no longer theirs to control. The clip had already begun its wildfire. Spread, igniting feeds across the country. Jasmine leaned back, serene, as if she knew exactly what she had done. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't traded insult for insult. She had stood her ground with precision, and in doing so, revealed the fragility of Kellyanne's fury. The narrator closed the scene in one breath. Jasmine Crockett reframed the battle not just between herself and Kellyanne Conway, but between two visions of America. Dignity versus rage. Truth versus noise. And the world was watching. The cameras zoomed out, the debate moved on, but nothing could eclipse the moment. The silence after Jasmine's words was louder than all the shouting that came before. And yet, as powerful as it was, no one knew that what happened after the cameras stopped rolling made it even bigger. The cameras clicked off, the lights dimmed, and the debate was officially over. But in truth, the story had only just begun. Within minutes, the clip of Jasmine's calm dismantling of Kellyanne Conway was everywhere. Social media, the accelerant of modern political theater, exploded like dry tinder catching fire. On Twitter, the hashtag DignityV's rage began trending within the hour. By midnight, it had climbed to the #1 spot nationwide. Another hashtag followed right behind it. Hashtag, "Are you finished?" Jasmine's simple opening line, now immortalized as a cultural clapback. On Instagram, creators raced to make reels. Some paired Jasmine's poised expression with captions like, "Strength doesn't shout." Others looped Kellyanne's face mid-scream, adding clown filters or captions mocking the theatrics. TikTok turned the exchange into a viral audio track. People lip-synced Jasmine's calm. "Are you finished?" Confrontations with bosses, parents, or even their pets. What Jasmine intended as a firm boundary in a heated debate had become the internet's newest weapon against chaos. But the memes were only part of the story. What truly mattered was the praise flooding in. Journalists who had been covering the debate live tweeted in awe, "Jasmine Crockett just delivered a masterclass in composure on live TV." Prominent anchors reposted the clip with captions like, "This is how you handle chaos without losing your ground." Political commentators who rarely agreed on anything seemed united in admiration, calling Jasmine's moment the antidote to noise and a modern civics lesson in real time. Celebrities added their voices to the chorus. A-list actors, musicians, and comedians all weighed in. One actor wrote, "Note to self, channel Jasmine Crockett when the trolls come for me." A comedian quipped, "Kellyanne screamed for 5 minutes. Jasmine ended her with 3 words. Musicians began sampling the phrase, "Are you finished?" into beats that would inevitably dominate club remixes within weeks, and then came the political voices. Lawmakers across the spectrum tweeted and posted. Allies celebrated Jasmine for embodying strength without rage. Even opponents careful with their wording acknowledged her discipline. With one senator writing, "Disagree with her politics, but Jasmine Crockett showed a level of restraint most of us could learn from." The ripple effect spread far beyond social media. By the next morning, the clip was replaying on every major network. CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News ran segments dissecting the moment. On one side, analysts praised Jasmine's composure. On the other, conservative commentators scrambled to defend Kellyanne, calling the reaction manufactured. But the damage was already done. The optics were undeniable. Side by side, replayed clips Kellyanne's finger jabbing. Jasmine's silent stillness told the story without needing narration. Newspapers ran bold headlines. Dignity silences rage on live TV. Jasmine Crockett delivers the moment. Of the debate, heads emerged within 24 hours, some framing the exchange as symbolic of a larger cultural divide. The loudest voices dominating verses. Those who win through patience and precision, and in living rooms across America, ordinary. People were talking. Families replayed the clip over breakfast. College students shared it in group chats, holding it up as proof that politics didn't always have to be a circus. Retirees emailed it to their friends with subject lines like, "Finally, someone with composure." But not everyone was celebrating. Kellyanne's defenders scrambled to spin the narrative. On talk radio, hosts tried to recast her shouting as passion and Jasmine's silence as weakness. Conservative blogs ran with headlines like "Crockett dodges questions with silence," yet the sheer velocity of the viral moment was impossible to contain. Every attempt to spin only fueled the fire. Even late-night television joined in. One host replayed Jasmine's calm rebuke, then looked straight at the camera and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, that's called parenting energy." Kellyanne just got told to use her inside voice. The audience roared. Another late-night comedian ended his monologue with a parody skit, actors reenacting the debate. One screaming nonsense while the other calmly sipped tea before dropping, "Are you finished?" It became the biggest laugh line of the night. By the week's end, it was more than a viral clip. It was a cultural touchstone. The moment sparked think pieces about gender, power, and the art of composure in politics. It was Jasmine's silence. A uniquely feminine form of strength in a system that often rewards aggression? Was Kellyanne's rage a symptom of a political culture addicted to outrage? Everywhere, the questions swirled. And Jasmine, she didn't post a single word. Her social media remained quiet, a deliberate choice that only deepened the impact. Silence became part of the narrative while the world debated her words. She refused to chase the noise. The narrator framed it. It was no longer just a debate moment. It was a mirror. America was forced to ask itself, in this fight between dignity and rage, which side are we truly on? But just as the fire reached its peak, a new chapter opened. Because what happened behind closed doors, away from the cameras, threatened to turn a viral clip into a turning point in American politics. Cliffhanger. And when Jasmine left that studio, the shockwaves followed her into places even she never expected. The dust had settled. The shouting had faded into the archives of television. But what lingered was not the noise, it was the silence. The narrator framed it clearly. This wasn't just a debate. It was a mirror for America. Guess when? Viewers replayed that clip over and over in living rooms, classrooms. And even on the Senate floor, they weren't just watching Kellyanne Conway scream or Jasmine Crockett wait her turn. They were watching two visions of America collide. One built on chaos, interruption, and outrage. The other anchored in dignity, composure, and unshaken truth. And in that collision, people began to see themselves. The lesson became universal. Rage burns hot, but it burns out fast. Composure, on the other hand, endures. Outrage makes headlines, but dignity makes history. For years, Americans had been told that the loudest voice wins. But Jasmine's moment cracked that illusion wide open. She showed that strength is not always in volume, but in restraint. Power is not always in force, but in focus. The narrator's voice rose with clarity. This wasn't just about two women on live TV. It was about us, about the kind of leadership we reward, about the kind of example we set for our children, about whether America chooses noise or chooses truth. It struck a deeper nerve. Viewers who had grown exhausted by the screaming matches of politics suddenly found themselves refreshed by something rare. Silence that spoke louder than sound. Jasmine's calm wasn't weakness. It was discipline. It was control. It was a reminder that leadership is not proven by how much you can shout, but by how well you can listen, pause, and respond with precision. For young people, it became a blueprint. Teachers shared the clip in classrooms, framing it as a lesson. In conflict resolution, sometimes the calmest reply is the strongest defense. Parents played it for their children, teaching them that composure under fire is a greater mark of strength than throwing the loudest punch. For the political world, it was a wake-up call. If voters admired Jasmine not for a zinger or an insult, but for her patience and poise, then perhaps the hunger for civility wasn't dead after all. Perhaps beneath the noise, America was craving leaders who would reflect dignity instead of chaos. The universal truth rang out: dignity greater than rage, composure greater than chaos, truth greater than spin. And in Jasmine's reply, short, calm, undeniable America saw what it had been missing. Leaders who don't mirror the shouting but rise above it. Leaders who can walk into a storm without letting it shake them. Leaders who don't confuse volume with vision. The narrator tied it together. Kellyanne shouted. Jasmine waited. One voice filled the air, but the other voice filled the nation. And when history remembers, it will not replay the noise. It will replay the calm. The crescendo built. This wasn't just a political skirmish. It was a lesson. In human behavior, in workplaces, in families, in friendships, people face moments of chaos, moments where others try to provoke or dominate. And every time we are given the same choice Jasmine had: escalate the noise or embody the calm. The moral cut through the noise like a bell. Sometimes the loudest voice is silenced by the calmest reply. As the screen faded to black, the story left America with a challenge. In a world addicted to outrage, who among us is brave enough to choose dignity? Who among us is patient enough to choose composure? And who among us is strong enough to understand that silence, used wisely, is not surrender, it is strategy? And so, what began as a television clash ended as something far bigger, a parable. For leadership in the 21st century, a reminder that the nation's future will not be decided by who yells the loudest, but by who stands the calmest. Because in the end, history does not remember the noise. It remembers the voice that rises above it. Kellyanne screamed. Jasmine replied with calm. And America chose who to remember. That single exchange has already outlived the moment it was broadcast. Because what people recall isn't the shrillness, the finger-pointing, the chaos. What people remember is the quiet composure that held steady against the storm. In a time when shouting has become the default language of politics, Jasmine reminded America that there is another way, a stronger way. This story isn't just about one debate or one viral clip. It's about a larger truth. Arrogance fades, but dignity endures. Noise can dominate a room, but it cannot command respect. And spin may twist the headlines for a night, but truth stands tall long after the lights dim. That's why this moment matters. It wasn't just a clash between two women. It was a choice laid bare for all of us. Do we want leaders who weaponize chaos, or leaders who embody clarity? Do we reward rage, or do we reward composure? The narrator leaves no doubt. In the long run, America doesn't remember who shouted the loudest. It remembers who stood the calmest. And now, it's your turn. If you believe in dignity over arrogance, in truth over spin, in leadership that rises above the noise, then this movement needs you. Subscribe. Share this story. Join this community that refuses to bow to chaos, that chooses justice, clarity, strength rooted in composure. Because every time we amplify voices of dignity, we send a message. The future will not be defined by rage. It will be defined by truth, courage, and calm. So stand with us. Let's make sure America remembers the right voice.